Composting has been an essential part of my gardening routine for years. There's something deeply satisfying about transforming food scraps and yard waste into nutrient-rich compost that feeds the soil and nourishes the plants I care about. But one thing I'd always struggled with was the final step, sifting the compost. It was necessary to remove larger particles that didn't break down and to ensure only a fine, nutrient-rich compost was left. And for years, I did it the hard way. I started out using a simple mesh screen, a DIY project from an old piece of wood and some wire mesh. Every time I made a new batch of compost, I'd carefully scoop it into a screen and painstakingly sift it by hand. It was time consuming, messy, and required a lot of effort. My arms would get sore from the constant shaking, and by the time I was done with just one batch, I was exhausted. But as much as I hated the sifting process, I knew it was essential for the compost to be properly prepared for use in my garden. My hands would always be full of dirt and sometimes remnants, and the whole process left me feeling more like a farmer than a gardener. That's when I started researching an easier way, something that would save time and effort, but still do the job effectively. After a bit of planning and a lot of trial and error, I decided to build my very own electric powered trommel. Standing in front of the completed trommel, I couldn't help but feel proud. It wasn't fancy, nor was it top of the line commercial model. It was made from scrap materials I had laying around, some wire mesh, lumber, an old electric motor, and a lot of patience. I had designed it so that the compost would tumble inside the rotating drum, sifting the fine material out while leaving larger undecomposed pieces behind. The first time I used it was like a dream come true. With just a flick of the switch, the motor hummed to life, the drum slowly started rotating. I grabbed a large shovel, loaded up the compost, and dumped it into the drum. Instantly, the compost began to tumble and sift, with the fine, crumbly material falling through the mesh into the waiting wheelbarrow below. At the same time, any larger chunks, twigs, eggshells, or unbroken bits of produce rolled out of the drum and into a separate pile, ready to be returned to the compost bin for another round of decomposition. Watching the process unfold was memorizing. The trommel spun effortlessly, separating the fine compost from the waste. I could see how much easier it was compared to the old days of shaking and rubbing the material through a screen by hand. The compost was falling into the wheelbarrow like magic, and my arms were not sore in the least. After about 5 minutes, my wheelbarrow was full of perfectly sifted compost. It was dark, fluffy, and smelling amazing, like earth, rich with life. I paused to appreciate the transformation, thinking back to the kitchen scraps, lawn clippings, and autumn leaves I had thrown into the compost pile months earlier. Now this finished product was ready to nourish my garden and provide the nutrients my plants needed to thrive. But before I could apply it to my garden, I had to move it into my holding bin. I grabbed the wheelbarrow and carefully wheeled it over to the storage area I had set up for finished compost. The holding bin wasn't huge, but it was just enough space to store my completed batches until I was ready to spread it around my garden beds. As I carefully dumped the sifted compost into the holding bin, I thought about the hundreds of composting tasks I'd done before, each time more grueling than the last. But now, with my electric trommel, this process was so much easier. There were no more aching muscles or long hours spent sifting by hand. The trommel did all the hard work for me. I watched the remaining compost in the trommel tumble around, knowing I'd still have plenty to sift. But even though the task felt never ending, I wasn't stressed. The trommel was working at full capacity, and in no time I had another wheelbarrow full of rich, dark compost ready for storage. As I emptied the last batch into the holding bin, I smiled and let out a satisfied sigh. It felt good to know I had this reliable system in place to process the compost I worked so hard to create. I thought about upcoming months of gardening ahead, how this compost would make my plants thrive, how it would nourish the soil, and how I'd be able to continue my sustainable gardening practices without the burden of hard, tedious labor. I glanced over at my compost pile. There was still plenty more composting to be done, and I knew that my trommel would continue to help me through every batch. I reached down to give the trommel another switch, excited to get started on the next batch. With the right tools, composting had become an enjoyable, rewarding process, one that didn't require sweat and sore muscles, but rather a simple flick of the switch. With the help of my trommel, composting has never been easier. What used to be a chore is now a smooth, efficient process. If you're looking to streamline your composting, consider investing in the right tools. Keep composting and watch your garden thrive. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more composting tips and tricks. And if you have any composting tips, drop them in the comments below.